you decided after the 5 locations, right, to partner up, have a strategic partner with XPONENTIAL. So you had this front row seat, as I think you said, where you saw all these other brands grow. So I'm curious, what were some of your big observations having this front row seat and seeing a umbrella of brands? What were some of the key takeaways as you saw some of these other companies come on and grow within the company?
That's a great question. Well, I think not everything is a rinse and repeat. It's not really a find and replace model. The notion of like taking another company's operations manual and just flopping out your name and slotting it in. The notion of taking somebody else's sales process and just making that your own, it doesn't necessarily resonate. It doesn't necessarily work. Even the labor model, you could see that within some of the Expo brands. It's different. One is more high intensity labor, and so there's a smaller, profit margin. So it's higher revenue, like where does that all sort out based on your product, based on your service? So I think that generally I've seen a lot of that, right? Because the minute that you have a different business model at the end of the day, you have to also incentivize people differently.
Right.
Right. And so from compensation structure, things like that. So I think, at the end of the day, you almost need to be so smart and understanding on your brand or your business that you remember that you need to drive your own business financials, just yet take the learnings and the expertise of how to do the actual franchise scale and franchise support and what makes most sense. Does it make most sense to do a weekly call with your whole entire team or to break it up into the different constituents within a different store or unit?
Mm-hmm.
What's the right training? What's the right support? What's going to move the needle for the business? That's another thing that I've really learned. It has to come from within. It has to come from within your P&L, within your structure, considering, of course, best practices that are working elsewhere and different ideas that are working elsewhere. But ultimately, the needle is only going to get moved on your business if it all makes sense within your business's framework.
Yeah. So it sounds like when you have a strategic partner, this is definitely not a one size fits all. It's not a cookie cutter model that just because there was other fitness holdings as part of this umbrella, everybody's business has different support needs. And even though the targeted audience may be similar or not, you really have to take a very customized individual approach, right? When you're part of a portfolio of brands.
Yeah. And I mean, but at the same time, the leverage is massive,
Yes.
right? The leverage. And so that's hugely beneficial. And, a reason why I went down that path that I would never, ever, sneeze at, like the leverage of showing up in a big way at a franchise show with all the different, franchise brokers around you, the leverage of the back end tools, the leverage of the back end's buying power, on retail and products and all of that type of stuff. That's huge. And also that's a huge reason that you take it down a notch, right? We're talking about franchisors, right? Coming into like a franchise strategic partner and a holdings company, take it down a level to the franchisees going into a franchisor.
Right.
There are many entrepreneurs too, right? It took me a long time to realize that I wasn't the entrepreneur in the room. The franchisees are the entrepreneurs too. And, they could go out and do this on their own, but they buy into a system because there's back-end processes that make a ton of sense for them. Yet they still are going to have a little creativity on the floor with regards to like, where do I show up in market? Who do I hire? Like those types of things. So I think it's an interesting kind of food chain of who you are and what you're going to lean on and bring, yet what you're going to kind of focus on to ultimately have a successful business, which is just the eye on the prize that we have to make sure we're headed towards.
Right. So I think that was great that you had an eye on the prize. You knew exactly where you wanted to go, but I want to bring up a different angle here that I know many emerging founders struggle with, and that is giving up their baby is sometimes how they feel, right? So Row House was your baby. How did you feel? I know initially it's probably very, very exciting that somebody has interest in helping you grow the business and grow the baby, and they have the expertise. But there's also some fear there too, and so there has to be some reluctance. And I know many emerging founders do have that reluctance that their identity is so tied to their business. How did you untie that?
Yeah, honestly, it was hard. I remember right after kind of it all went down and I took a step back, which I was very happy about because I had a young family at the time and I just felt like I wasn't driving the business forward the way that the business almost deserved
Hmm.
to be driven forward. And so that was part of it. I wanted somebody to come in that didn't mind working on a Sunday afternoon, to be honest. And I was having a hard time with that after doing it for so many years. So anyway, I kind of got to a place where I felt like, whoa, my identity is all wrapped up in row house. What's going to happen next?
Yeah.
And I remember walking into an Equinox and being like, okay, I'm going to work out here. Wow, this whole world still exists. Who knew? Because I've worked for Equinox so many years back too. And so I think it's hard. It's hard to make that shift. But personally, for me, this was meant to be kind of like a brand building opportunity, serve a market that I didn't think was served, and move on to another chapter. I had a 5-year stint in kind of digital publishing aggregation and brand building in the licensing space under a needs of use Scripps and Scripps Ventures company in New York City.
Hmm.
That was meaningful. That was like a meaningful chapter of my life. And then I had the 5-year stint or so with New York City Tourism under Mayor Michael Bloomberg, which is a meaningful stint. I had the side hustle along. This was my first foray into fitness. And I was like, it's not going to be my only thing. Like I love the brands. I had major integrity towards the owners that bought in, and I wanted to continue to serve them. And so that became a little challenging for me because I wanted to continue to serve them and didn't necessarily always, have the influence that I would have loved giving up my baby, but I had to trust the process and I had to kind of step away because that's the deal I signed up for. So I think, the other side of it is like, when you make any sort of decision with your baby, you're saying
Hmm.
you really have to do your due diligence. You have to think about the decision you're making. And ultimately, you make the best decision you can make at the time you make it. Ironically, I was just with Anthony from Exponential. I consider him a wonderful business leader, and seeing what he's done over the course of the years has been extremely impressive. And we had this conversation. He actually said that to me. He said, you make the best decision you can at the time that you make it. And I think that that's what I did. And Eric and I were aligned on this being a good move. It actually brought us out to California a bit, which has been wonderful for our family. And it's helped me get to a place where I love what I do now, which is in many times helping other franchisors that are along their way, figure out the right way to grow, specifically on like client value proposition, some support, understanding the franchisee franchisor relationship in the early days as you emerge, so you don't sign up for the wrong deals, that type of stuff. And so I've done this a couple of times over with a few brands. And I love it. So keep the eye on the prize, we said, from like the business standpoint, but
Right.
also from the personal standpoint. I think letting go of my baby was just a way to get myself to the next level where I could serve other businesses as well.
Sure. Maybe it was a little bit easier for you since you had already achieved fulfillment in a few other stints throughout your career, right? You had the 5-year and then the 5-year with New York City Tourism. So you were having these blocks of fulfillment and you had practiced moving on to something else that you were enjoy doing. And I think maybe
I'm
that,
writing that down. That's really nice.
well, I think it's true. Just hearing your story, that it makes perfect sense because there are a lot of founders though, Deborah, that this is like their one and only thing, but you had already kind of built that muscle of being able to do something, feel like, okay, I took this as far as I want to go. And then you call it luck, fate, whatever you want to call it, but you were getting fulfillment in the next thing. So I
Yeah,
think,
and from that standpoint, I think you're right. Like if it was my only thing and it was my whole life wrapped up in it, I don't think giving up your baby is necessarily the right move. The thing there also is it's true. Nobody will ever understand how to dial up or turn up the business as much as the founder.
yeah.
It doesn't happen. Like I had brought on a COO at one point and she was wonderful and she had major skills in certain areas beyond what I had.
Mhm.
In those particular areas, finance, for example, but ultimately it became important for me to go learn finance in a better way and adopt it in, or, just to find the right people to lean on. But still, I think, if you're here, if this is your business and if you believe you can keep moving to drive it forward, yet you can find the right people to pull in kinds of under your guidance and
Mhm.
keep a seat at the table, that's definitely an angle too. Oh, and honestly, an angle where I've supported some people, because nobody will ever take care of your business the way you will take care of your business as a founder, I don't think.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fumey, or Emerging Franchise Group LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.